Would you believe me if I told you that there's a country that was literally named after a bunch of shrimp? Now imagine that same place also houses a massive active volcano, dense rainforests and vast savannas, all packed into one perfect triangle on the map. It sounds impossible, right? But it's 100% real, and today we are diving deep into that fascinating country, Cameroon. And trust me, we're not just looking at a travel brochure, we're going all the way back to the start of this epic story. So how old are we talking here? Try 50,000 years, that's how long humans have been hanging out in what is now Cameroon, according to archaeological evidence. But the real game changers emerge much later, around the 5th century CE. During this time, the Sao Kingdom emerged in the Lake Chad Basin, but they were eventually taken over by the Kotoko state, which then got sucked into the massive Bornu Empire in the late 19th century, at which point the people there had largely converted to Islam. Now, Islam didn't just walk into Cameroon, it was brought in through conquest, immigration, and commerce from North and Northwestern Africa. And the group most responsible for this powerful shift, the Fulani. These pastoralists started arriving in the northern part of Cameroon in the 18th century. At first they were welcomed, but a powerful leader named Usman Dan Fodio was leading a big Islamic movement out of Nigeria called a jihad. His ideas inspired the Fulani to revolt. Then, in the early 1800s, a man named Modibo Adama led this huge movement. It brought large parts of northern Cameroon into the Sokoto Empire. This expansion reached a kingdom called Bamim, but the Fulani didn't force Bamim to become Muslim right away. That religious change happened much later. In fact, their ruler, Sultan Njoya, accepted Islam in the early 20th century. Okay, that covers the north and the middle. Now let's look at the coast. This is where a different outside influence came in. But let's rewind a bit. Back in 1472, the Portuguese explorer Fernão de Pau sailed along the coast. And what did he see in the Wouri River? Prawns. Lots of them. He called the river Rio dos Camarões, or the River of Prawns. And voila, that is how Cameroon got its name. After Pau came centuries of European traders, first the Portuguese, then the Dutch, and later the British and Germans. For a long time they traded human beings, making Cameroon a major source for the Atlantic slave trade. Just imagine, ports like Bimbia and Douala shipped people out. Trade routes went deep inland to get enslaved people from kingdoms like the Bamileke and Bamum. Then, in the early 1800s, the slave trade started to shrink. Traders turned to other goods like rubber, palm oil, and other raw materials. But at the same time, Christian missionaries also arrived. So, people like the Englishman Alfred Saker started Baptist stations in the 1840s and 50s. But it just gets messier from here because now we're entering the scramble for Africa. Despite the British having the most influence on the coast, the Germans show up and surprise. They claim the whole region as Cameroon in 1884. The explorer Gustav Nachtigall annexed the Douala coast, and from there the Germans pushed inland, creating plantations and exploiting the people for forced labour. But then World War I hits. In 1916, British and French forces defeated the German troops, and Germany's time in Cameroon was over. What happens next is a massive division. In 1919, the London Declaration split the territory between the French and the British. The French zone was called French Cameroon, and the British zone was split into northern and southern Cameroons. Flash forward to 1960, and French Cameroon was granted independence and became the Republic of Cameroon, with Ahmadou Ahidjo as its first president. But what about the British half? Well, in 1961, they held a referendum. The people in the northern Cameroons voted to join Nigeria, but the people in the southern Cameroons, they voted to join the newly independent Republic of Cameroon in a federation. And as you can imagine, it was pretty confusing, because even though they were one country, the former French and British areas kept separate legal, educational, and legislative systems. However, this all changed in 1972 when a national referendum turned the country into a unitary state and renamed the United Republic of Cameroon. Ahidjo stepped down in 1982, and his Prime Minister, Paul Biya, took over. And guess what? He's still in power today, having been elected to his first full term in 1984. Biya even changed the name back to the simple Republic of Cameroon. But we'll talk more about his presidential term and economic contributions later on. For now, let's switch our focus and take a look at Cameroon's impressive landscapes. Now, if you look at the shape of Cameroon, it looks like this massive, slightly lopsided, irregular triangle. It's located just north of the equator, right at what they call the hinge of the West African coastline, where West Africa kind of curves into Central Africa. Remember this because this position is key to its massive geographical diversity, which we'll get to in a second. First, let's talk size and neighbours. Cameroon covers an area of about 475,440 square kilometres, or 184 square miles. And because of that triangular shape, it's got a ton of neighbours. Starting from the coast and swinging clockwise, it borders 6 other countries and a body of water. To the southwest, you have the Gulf of Guinea. That's your coastline. Then, moving north, you have Nigeria along the northwest border, and Chad and the Central African Republic in the northeast. Now, down in the south and southeast, the country shares borders with the Republic of the Congo, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea. And with that many neighbours, you already know that Cameroon is an absolutely critical connector for trade, culture, and travel across the region. But here's the most stunning part about Cameroon. It's often called Africa in miniature because it has 4 distinct topographical regions. First up, let's go south, right to the coast. You have these low coastal plains that are absolutely smothered in equatorial rainforests. Think lush, hot, and humid. These forests stretch inland, almost reaching the Sanaga River. And this is where you find the bulk of that beautiful tropical diversity. Now head toward the centre of the country, and everything changes. You move from dense forest to the massive Adamawa Plateau. This is a geographical wall that divides the south from the north. And speaking of the north, stretching from the foot of the Adamawa Plateau up towards Lake Chad, you have the Great Northern Plains. This is where you find your classic, beautiful savanna grasslands, which contrast wildly with these incredibly unusual rock formations found in the Mandara Mountains. From there, let's look west and northwest, along that border with Nigeria. Now, this is the 4th region, and it's a showstopper. It's a land of rolling hills and intense volcanic mountains cloaked in incredibly lush vegetation. Fun fact, this is where we find the undisputed king of the landscape, Mount Cameroon. Folks, this mountain is huge. It stands at 4,095 metres tall, which is a staggering 13,435 feet. That makes it the highest peak in all of sub-Saharan West Africa. But it's not just a mountain, it's actually an active volcano that dominates the entire region, creating a unique climate. So, just to recap, you've got a tropical coast, dense rainforest, high plateau, savanna plains, and a massive active volcano. Seriously, who needs to leave the country when you have all of that? It's this insane geographical diversity that underpins the country's population, making it one of the most urban and ethnically diverse places in this part of Africa. And that brings us perfectly to the next topic. But before we jump into it, tell me, if you could only visit one of these regions, the rainforest, the volcano, or the northern plains, which one are you picking? Drop your choice in the comments. Now, going back, we've ventured through the vast landscapes of Cameroon. Now let's dive into the twin pillars of any modern country: politics and economy. First, let's look at the big picture. Cameroon is a major player, a true gateway for Central Africa. Its location is strategic, which makes it an incredibly influential country in the regional economic and monetary community. But the reality is, the country's economic potential has been held back by some pretty deep structural weaknesses. It's got poor infrastructure, especially in electricity, roads and internet connectivity, an underdeveloped financial system, and like many countries, it's heavily reliant on exporting raw commodities. So, just to give you an idea of the numbers, between 2020 and 2023, Cameroon faced overlapping crises, and its average GDP growth was pretty sluggish, hovering at just 2.6%. However, things are looking up a little. The World Bank projects real GDP growth will hit 3.7% in 2024, and then move slightly above 4% in 2025 and 2026. This moderate optimism is being driven by some major projects, like the Nachtigal hydroelectric dam, which now accounts for a massive 1/3 of the country's current energy supply. That's a huge step for stability. So, how big is this economy? Well, Cameroon's GDP in 2024 was worth an estimated $51.33 billion US. And while the economy is trying to grow, the government is also working to keep its finances in check. The fiscal deficit actually fell to 0.8% of GDP in 2023, down from 1.1% the year before. They achieved this by cutting back on fuel subsidies and tightening up tax collection. Plus, their public debt is expected to be on a downward trend, decreasing to about 36.8% of GDP by 2026, down from 40.3% in 2024. That's good news, but experts still say the debt carries a high risk of distress due to liquidity issues. And honestly, it's a tricky balance. And this brings us to the issue of social progress. Because despite the economic movement, poverty remains stubbornly high. Poverty rates haven't budged since 2001, and with rapid population growth, the number of people living in extreme poverty has been pushed above 10 million people as of 2024. This is reflected in the country's high level of inequality, with a Gini coefficient of 42.2%, showing a stark gap between regions and between cities and rural areas. So for Cameroon to truly succeed, the thinking needs to shift. It needs to embrace the private sector, redefine the state's role, and seriously boost labour productivity. Right now they have an IMF programme in place to help guide these reforms, but major, deep changes are not expected overnight. But you know what the foundation is of everything we've just talked about? It's politics. The whole political stage is dominated by one man, President Paul Biya. And guess how long he's been in charge? Since 1982. That's more than 4 decades. He won his 7th term in 2018. But honestly, many people criticise that election heavily. Because he's getting older, he doesn't appear in public much, which leads to constant whispers about who will be next. But now we dive right into the heart and soul. The culture. This is another reason why Cameroon is nicknamed Africa in miniature. It's an incredibly vibrant fusion of over 250 distinct ethnic groups. Think about that. Each group brings its own unique food, music, and traditions to the table. So you've got the Tika, the Bamileke, the Ewondo, the Fulani, and so many others. And this ethnic mix means you get a puzzle of languages, starting with the 2 official languages, French and English. But then you add hundreds of local dialects on top of that, like Fulfulde and Bassa. Besides language, another thing that sets Cameroon apart is its unique sound, because the country is absolutely bursting with music and art. Traditional music played on drums and other instruments tells stories of history and customs. But the modern music scene? That's where the party is. Maybe you've heard of Makossa. It's that iconic, smooth, guitar-driven pop sound that everyone loves. Then there's Bikutsi, which is pure, high-energy rhythmic fire, especially popular in the central areas. If anything, that music will definitely force you to dance. Then, if you head north, you might see the beautiful, traditional pousse-pousse dance. Seriously, every corner of this country has its own rhythm, which naturally leads us to the food. Because dancing makes you hungry, doesn't it? And much like everything else here, Cameroonian cuisine is the ultimate flavour mashup. African, French, and even Mediterranean tastes. Among the many, many choices, you simply have to try ndole. It's the national dish, and it's this rich, spicy stew made with bitter leaf and ground peanuts, usually served with boiled plantains. And of course, you can't skip the street food. That's the real cultural test. So while you're out, walking about, look for crispy plantain fritters or those satisfying yam patties. They're always served with a punchy, spicy sauce like pili pili, and it's absolutely delicious. But do you know where all these incredible people, foods and sounds come together? It's in the festivals. Events like the Douala International Festival of Arts are massive community celebrations. This is where the culture truly lights up. You get to see all those traditional dances and hear the music genres, like balafon, in one spectacular spot. Even big religious holidays like Christmas and Ramadan are huge affairs, celebrated with massive feasts and lively processions. So, there you have it. Cameroon, a land of ancient kingdoms, massive volcanoes, complex politics, and an unbelievably vibrant culture. It truly earns that name. Africa in miniature, don't you think? If you loved this video, you'll definitely enjoy this next one.